Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Timothy here with Mana Rocks, and today I'm excited to introduce you to our new Arena Cube experience, the Jank Divers Unrestricted Cube. First off, yes, Jank Divers will be the new brand name for our Cube community, and in the coming weeks and months, we'll be looking to migrate Cube-related content to a new YouTube channel. I'll still be using this channel for top 10s, draft videos, or whatever other personal projects I'll be working on when I can get back to regularly making content, but we'll be looking to grow the Jank Divers community elsewhere. Until then, we'll be talking about Cube content here, starting with the introduction of our new Unrestricted Cube. Before we get into the meat of this video, I want to first off thank everyone who's joined our community so far. I've personally had a blast playing our Peasant Cube with everyone, and a huge shout out to our admins for developing the data analysis sheets we use to adjust the cube. If you're interested in joining the Jank Divers family, I will have links to our Discord in the description below. For now, let's take a quick peek at what we can expect from the Unrestricted Cube. So what exactly do we mean by Unrestricted Cube? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. Until now, we've been drafting solely with our Peasant Cube, which Chris and myself are quite proud of. We've tweaked and balanced it to the point where it delivers a fun, engaging experience nearly every time we draft. However, we had some rumblings in the community about whether or not we'd be making a quote-unquote Rares Cube, something similar to the Arena Cube already present on the platform. And we did exactly that. We scoured every card available to us and put together an initial run at what we believe to be a deep interactive card pool, including rares and mythics. We have everything on Arena at our disposal. Of course, we're still promoting our Peasant Cube, and it'll be the primary focus of the group, but if you've got an itch to play with rares and mythics in your collection, the Unrestricted Cube is here to help. A couple logistics about the cube. First, the Unrestricted Cube will be kicking off as a 450 card cube, which is a wider card pool than our Peasant Cube at the making of this video. 450 cards means that in an 8-person draft, only 80% of the card pool is opened, so there will be a decent amount of variation from draft to draft. This makes specific one-card archetypes harder to reliably draft, but there's less of that going on in this cube. Second, the Unrestricted Cube will be pulling from the entire catalog of cards on Arena. When we initially made the Peasant Cube, we had a restriction about which sets we wanted to include, keeping the card pool limited to only cards that appeared in standard legal sets. With the advent of Jumpstart, we eased up on the restrictions and decided to play with anything that was available to us, so long as the cards felt like a good fit for the cube. This will carry over into the Unrestricted Cube. Everything is fair game, including historic anthologies, Planeswalker decks, Jumpstart, and even a few Brawl exclusives like Reese the Redeemed. We should get a fair number of updates throughout the year if Arena continues to make remastered sets in the vein of Amonkhet Remastered, and supposedly we'll be getting a Pioneer Masters before the end of this year, which will also add to the cube. Last but not least, we've made a conscious decision to build the card pool to support typical macro strategies present in most Magic formats rather than honing in on specific two-color archetypes. This is a pretty big tonal shift from the Peasant Cube, where each color pair has a certain subset of specific themes built into the guilds. For example, in the Peasant environment, the green-white deck is typically your +1/+1 counters matters deck, and you should generally take a synergy-driven approach to drafting that deck when you're in those colors. In the Unrestricted Cube, we wanted to support wider playstyles such as aggro, control, and tempo. So rather than defining what each color pair is supposed to do, we planted cards in each monocolored section in order to facilitate different playstyles in the same colors. Black is a great example. The tools are certainly there to build a grindy controlling deck, but we've also planted a black aggro deck into the mix. Depending on which color or colors you pair with black, you can get wildly different decks from the pool. So with all this being said, I wanted to take some time to outline a few of the things you can expect from this cube. Rather, I want to highlight for the regular drafters in our community the major differences you'll see draft in the Unrestricted Cube from what we've come to expect from the Peasant environment. First off, I want to talk about one of the biggest pickups we get when we shift from the Peasant card pool to the Rare and Mythic card pool, and that is Wraths and Sweepers. If you've done a couple Peasant Cube drafts with us, you know the Sweepers at the common and uncommon rarity usually cap out at a certain power level. For example, your red sweepers like Flame Sweep and Cinderclasm usually max out at 2 damage to each creature. That number takes a pretty big leap when you start looking at rares and mythics. Cards like Storm's Wrath and Hour of Devastation are actually reliable sweepers and will take out all but the largest threats. The same is true of black. At the peasant level, black sweepers function similarly to the red ones, fallen in the -2/-2 territory with cards like Golden Demise and Pestilent Haze. In the Unrestricted Cube, we have access to Languish and Bantu's Last Reckoning, among other sweeper-like effects. This means that your sweepers are less so ways to wipe a board of small creatures, and more so a way to clear a board of any creature, no matter the size. Perhaps the most significant part of this is that white actually gets to play with traditional wraths in this setting. Board wipes are actually part of white's color identity, but due to power level, you don't see white sweepers at lower rarities, which means in a peasant environment, it's difficult for white to play a traditional control strategy. Here, white gets to pick up cards like Realm Cloak Giant and actual straight-up Wrath of God, so white has tools to break away from just being aggro and function as a control color. The Peasant Cube is a bit bereft of actual traditional control decks. Even the decks that are attempting to be a quote-unquote control deck usually boil down to grindy mid-range decks that still have to attack with creatures as a primary win condition. But in this new cube environment, you can build an actual control deck. In fact, you can probably build a completely creatureless deck due to the presence of dedicated sweepers, but you'll probably need the help from the next subset of cards I want to talk about. Perhaps one of the more exciting aspects of being able to play with rares and mythics is the presence of Planeswalkers. Now, the Peasant Cube has a few Planeswalkers floating around, but the uncommon Planeswalkers from War of the Spark fill niche roles, and in a cube centered mostly around creature combat, none of them have ever gotten out of control. The gloves are completely off with the Unrestricted Cube, and each color is sporting roughly 3 to 4 Planeswalkers. We have some real all-stars here, like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Liliana, Dreadhorde General, but regardless of what color pair you're facing down, be prepared to run into a walker or two. We wanted to be careful not to jam too many oppressive Planeswalkers into the cube from the onset, and no, Oko, Thief of Crowns will not be included in the cube, now or ever, but it's still a pretty big step up from what we're used to in the Peasant Cube. Remember, Sweepers and Planeswalkers is a tried and true strategy, and as previously stated, the result we're expecting is that dedicated control decks will emerge from the drafts. Plan accordingly, and make sure you don't wind up dead in the water to a Planeswalker. One of the unfortunate characteristics of designing the Peasant Cube with the card pool available to us on Arena is that cards that fill out our colorless section are somewhat wanting or lackluster. Sure, we've got our Icy Manipulators and Entrancing Liars, but we've also got a decent amount of what we would consider to be filler. Unfortunately, that's just where we're at with artifacts and colorless cards given the tools at our disposal, but we make do with what we've got. The Unrestricted Cube fares a good deal better with this, since rare and mythic artifacts tend to be quite powerful. The new cube will feature a buffed up colorless section, including powerful equipment and ramp tools, as well as just ubiquitously good cards like Ugin the Ineffable or the Immortal Sun. The power gap between the Peasant Cubes and Unrestricted Cubes colorless section is almost laughable, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's correct to first pick colorless cards more often than not in this new environment. Drafting a good colorless card lets you easily pivot into whatever color pairs are open without the need to abandon draft picks, and so they tend to make solid first picks. There are also colorless cards that fit different strategies well. Ugin the Spirit Dragon and Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger are welcome additions to ramp decks, whereas something like Golos is a nod to multicolor decks, which is actually the next point I want to bring up. As mentioned, the cube is designed such that you'll actually see your fair share of multicolor decks floating around. When I say multicolor decks, I'm referring to the elusive 4 or 5 color decks that you don't typically see in the Peasant Cube. Technically, the tools are there to make a multicolor deck work in the Peasant Cube, but so many of the color pairs have a specific goal in mind, and so many of the gold cards are specific to that guild's goal that it doesn't benefit you often to go out of your way to splash more colors. It can be done, it just hasn't had a lot of success. The Unrestricted Cube has 2 things going for it in this vein. First, it has better color fixin and ramp options, and second, the incentives for branching out into multiple colors are much more worthwhile. We've opted to include a small 5-card multicolor section, including premium gold cards like Yarok and Shulane, which provide powerful effects if you can cast them. Not only that, but with our design focus being less centered on specific 2-color archetypes, it's easier to find cards in a 3rd or 4th color that are more in tune with what you're trying to draft. From our testing, we expect 3-color decks to pop up often, with base green 4 or 5-color decks being in the mix. Just to share an anecdote, during testing, I drafted a Sultai deck featuring Yarok, but also had Zakama in my deck alongside 1 Mountain and 1 Plains, which I could fetch up with Cultivate or Migratory Route. It was a blast to play, and we hope the small 3-color section adds a little bit of spice for the drafters who love playing more colors than they should. To round things out, I feel like it's worth mentioning that one of the downsides to creating the Unrestricted Cube was realizing how wildcard intensive it might be to play on Arena. While the cube isn't entirely rares and mythics, it's the vast majority of the card pool, and while there are plenty of us who play enough that wildcards shouldn't be a huge issue, I'd be remiss to point out that this may alienate certain players from being able to draft with us. As someone who drafts often and rarely plays constructed formats, wildcards have never been an issue for me, but I want to recognize that the cube will put some stress on players' stock of wildcards. This is why we want to keep our primary focus on the Peasant Cube for accessibility's sake, so think of the Unrestricted Cube as an alternative experience for those interested. Of course, we want to get as many people playing with us as possible, so if you're short a few wildcards, come join us anyway, and we'll sort something out. That being said, if this cube interests you, it might be a good idea to start saving your wildcards now. Alright, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Again, I'm pretty stoked about the whole thing. I'm ecstatic about the level of growth we've seen in the Jank Diver community, and I'm excited to see how the Unrestricted Cube pans out. Remember, this will be something of a maiden voyage for the cube, so we can't expect everything to be perfect from the beginning. The best way to help us improve the cube is to draft with us and give us your feedback. We love hearing from new players, so remember, you can find a link to our Discord in the description below. You can also comment below for any questions or concerns related to the new cube, and for now, subscribe below for more news and content about the Jank Divers community. My name's Timothy with Mana Rocks. Thanks for joining us, and I'll hear from you soon.